So this is one of those stories I think most people have run into once or twice, but I find that most folks, most preachers, most theologians get really caught up on questions that I think aren't really the central issue. Okay? They get caught up on like, well, what did the rich man do wrong? Or what did Lazarus do right? Or what does it mean that you got a heaven and a hell? And is this metaphorical or is this literal or whatever? Right? They get all caught up in sort of the imagery. And they miss the one super shocking moment that I think is the key to understanding this parable. To understand the shockingness of the moment, I think it's useful to put it into modern terms, because I think our modern ears don't hear the shocking moment that ancient ears, which heard this the first time, would have picked up on. Okay? So let's take a moment. We're going to move this into modern terms. Okay? So let's say you're super rich. And when I say super rich, what I mean is when I get lost in the Lehigh Valley, I will run across these big houses, usually back in the mountains somewhere, with like a 7-car garage. Okay, so you're like a 7-car garage rich place. Okay? You all have probably gotten lost and found those places too. Okay. And every morning you wake up and you think to yourself, you know what I need? I need coffee. But I don't want to make my own coffee. That's hard. So what I'll do is I'll Uber Eats myself my frozen upside-down caramel macchiato with 4 pumpkins and extra whipping of extra cream. Okay? And your Uber Eats guy shows up every day. We're going to call him Ed. So Ed shows up every day and he brings you your crazy drink. And days go by and years go by, and all of a sudden Ed dies of a perfectly preventable disease without any health care. And you, because you've done nothing but drink a milkshake every morning thinking you were drinking coffee but being mistaken, will go ahead and die of a heart attack. Okay? No one got my coffee slam there? No one? Everyone's like, let me go sip my macchiato now. I'm not picking up macchiatos. My wife likes macchiatos. But seriously, 4 pumpkins and extra whip? Okay. It flew with 8 o'clock, let me tell you. All right. They thought it was funny. Anyways, so you go ahead, you die, you end up in hell, you look up, and of course, equivalent to us would have been seeing Jesus. You see Jesus there. Next to Jesus is good old Ed. Now, this is where I want you to stop for a second. Okay? Stop here in the moment. You're in hell. You see Jesus. I don't know about you. I don't really care who else is with Jesus at this moment, right? Because I would be trying to plead my case, right? The logical thing. I didn't do it. It must have been wrong. Or I'm so sorry. I totally did. I mean, there's lots of ways to plead your case, but you'd be pleading your case, right? You know what this dude does? You know what this guy does? He sees God. He sees Ed. And he says, hey, God, can you send Ed down here with my macchiato? Because it's sort of hot down here. That's how much the rich man isn't getting it. Think about how absolutely entrenched his view of his superiority of Ed must be to be sitting in hell and sending Uber orders through GC. That sort of entrenchment only comes from one place. The man has a hatred for what he thinks Ed is. His heart is so hardened that he doesn't want to go to heaven if heaven means being with people like Ed. Because he is so convinced that surely Ed is not as good as him. That surely that cannot be God. That cannot be heaven. Or if it is, he doesn't want to be there. Because it would be better to live in hell than to acknowledge he is Ed's equal. Now, those of you who have watched enough of my sermons know I believe in hell. I absolutely do. Okay? And you know, if you've watched enough of my sermons, that I believe that there are people who choose to be there. When I was in college, I was given an assignment by a religion professor to do 3 interreligious dialogues. I mean, I had to go find someone who's not Christian, have a dialogue about what it means for me to be Christian, what it means to be them, what it means to them to be whatever religion they are. Now, I know it's going to come as a super duper surprise to you all, but when I was in college, I was both an overachiever and a little mischievous. Yeah, see, the mischievous one, you guys buy that one. So I came up with a brilliant idea. It's like, well, the college professor just said, not my religion, so not another Christian. And I knew what he meant was to go like to the local temple, to the local mosque, to the local Buddhist temple, maybe go find Hindus or whatever, right? So I did. I went ahead and talked to a wonderful rabbi, very smart. She was awesome. Then I went down and talked to a Buddhist priest. And then I saved my third one because I figured I could justify passing with 2 out of 3, right? And then I went ahead and found some of my, let's go with, more unique friends who I knew people, who knew people, who knew people, to see if they could hook me up with a Satanist. So I could have an interreligious dialogue. Because I like tormenting my professors. Okay? So I sit down with a LaVeyan Satanist. First thing I learned that day, different denominations within Satanism. Who would have thunk? Okay, a LaVeyan Satanist walks on in, we have coffee, walks on in, sits on down. First thing I notice about him, he's got a giant swastika tattooed on his forehead. Sort of can't miss that. So we get talking and I ask him, so are you a Nazi? Figure reasonable question to a dude who has a giant tattoo of a swastika on his forehead. And he says, well, actually I am. And I'm like, okay, is that normal? And he said, more than you would think would overlap between the two communities. But they are separate communities. I was like, okay, good to know. We get talking, and part of the assignment was to talk about the spiritual journey that brings you to your religion. So I said, well, how did you get to being a LaVeyan Satanist? And he said, well, first, I started off as a neo-Nazi, and then I read the Bible, and in the Bible, I realized that Jesus was born a Jew, lived a Jew, died a Jew. I said, yeah, that's right. And he said, well, I'm a Nazi. I don't want to be where there's Jews. I was like, okay, there's a logic to that. He said, therefore, I figured if I became a Satanist, there's no way I'd go to heaven. Which would assure I'd never have to live with Jews. I was like, okay. Now, I believe that dude meant it. And my experience in life is that 95% of the time, therefore it's always a safe bet, is just believe people when they tell you who they are. Okay? People do lie about that, but more often than not, people are honest with who they are. And I really believe this was who this person was. And I believe if he had died that day, shown up at the gates, he would have, as he said he would have, asked Jesus, were you born a Jew, lived a Jew, died a Jew? And I think Jesus would have said, well, yeah. And then he would have been like, well, then I want to go to hell. Because I believe his hate hardened him so much that he'd rather deal with hell than deal with the hate that had overtaken his heart. And I think we're talking about a similar spiritual situation for the rich man today. Now, he's no Nazi Satanist. Okay, the guy I met that day in the coffee shop, that dude, his hate he wore like a badge. His hate he walked around with and reveled in. But I don't think his hate was any more spiritually destructive to him than the rich man's hate. It just looked different. I think the rich man for so long looked at himself and said, I have accomplished all these things with all my hard work. I have been so greatly blessed with all this stuff. I am better than that dude at my gate. I am better than that guy on the side of the street. And I think he so believed that elitism turned into hatred, slowly crept into his heart and hardened it. Not just to the suffering of others, but hardened it into the belief that he was somehow better, somehow more human, somehow deserving greater. To the point that he could not imagine giving up that hate, even if it meant staying in hell. See, we as Christians are to be people of love. God is love, after all. God reinforces over and over and over, well, there are differences and disagreements. Well, there are worldly things that divide us. At the end of the day, we are all, human or animal or other, part of God's creation. And we as humans are children of God, beloved, cared for, looked after for from God. And while the world wants us to believe that we are so different and that some are always better than others, that is not the message of God. God's message is one of love and equality. God's message is one where he says, the things that divide you are never stronger than the love that should unite you. And man, the world tries to divide us on race, tries to divide us on politics, tries to convince Republicans that Democrats are evil, tries to convince Democrats that Republicans are evil, tries to convince us that that bully that was mean to us in high school surely went to hell, tries to convince us all sorts of ways that our brothers and sisters in Christ are somehow lesser than us. They never are. Here's my challenge to you this week. No matter who you are, take a moment and I want you to ask yourself a question. If you were to walk up to the pearly gates and Jesus was to meet you there, and the person or group of people you dislike, disagree with the absolute most, no matter what that means, was standing next to Jesus, is there anyone or any group that could be standing there that would have you turn around rather than walk in?